Hi there, and welcome to Between Two Moose, a place where we get to explore trends and topics tied to teaching and learning with technology. I'm your co-host, Chris Sessums, Director of Academic Affairs at D2L, and I'm joined by my co-host, the little engine that could, Kenneth Chapman, Vice President of Market Research at D2L.
Hi,
Good to
Chris.
see you, Ken.
Happy
Good to
back to
see you.
school.
Back to school is it, and today I thought it would be fun to unpack this idea um, related to back to school with so many people going online or hybrid models. But where I am anyway, here in Maryland, we are seeing lots of folks. Most schooling is online in K-12 and in higher education for the most part. There are exceptions, but there was this idea that I stumbled upon that I wanted to get your reaction to. And it's this idea that, in my thinking, online learning is a social challenge, and
Mhm,
it's not a technical one.
mhm.
And I wanted to get your reaction to that. When you hear that online learning is a social challenge and not necessarily a technical one, what does that trigger for you?
Chris, that's an obvious statement to me, but I think it's something that when we, when we get our attention drawn to a shiny tool or a piece of technology, we tend to think too much about that and it being a thing in and of itself. I take a step back. My kids had their first day of school yesterday. Hopefully, they'll have a few of those before they get sent back home to work online. But what was amazing to me, the morning was full of fear and nervousness and wearing a mask and social distancing and all that kind of stuff. They're young kids. But at the end of the day, what really struck me is, when they got into the car, their faces were lit up. How was your day? It was the best day ever. My teacher did this, my classmates did this. It really impacted that. This is the classroom and the learning experience as a whole is truly a social and emotional undertaking. And so the reason why online learning is inherently a social problem and not a technical one is we have human beings on both ends of that process. We have human beings as educators that we need to help understand that we're dealing with a different medium. It's not about the technology. The classroom, your desks and your blackboard are your technology of the classroom. My voice and your ears are the technology of that classroom. We need to map the human ways that we engage with each other, that we find what's of interest to each individual, that we work with them and adapt the different technology or tools to those human purposes. So it's a human endeavor in that we have to really enable and understand the educators that are humans and the students and parents that are the stakeholders and the ones benefactors of that. Is that how you look at that, Chris? Am I off as a technologist here?
I was just delighted to hear a technologist with that response, that you recognize the human element of the technology. The technology is there to serve us, right? We're not serving it. At least we're not supposed to be. But it's easy to lose sight of that. And I recognize when I'm working with numbers of educators across the globe right now in moving from the physical classroom to an online classroom, one of the things I find them regularly confronting me with is like, I just don't understand the technology. And I think, but that's not what you should be worrying about per se.
Right.
Or maybe I recognize there are some hurdles there around understanding what technology to use. But if you're starting with that, I feel like you're going to paint yourself in a corner really quickly when you focus on the technology and not, well, what was I doing in my classroom?
Yeah.
And just start really simple with, how can I sort of replicate that? Let's take it easy here, and not reinvent, not get too crazy, but how can I kind of replicate that as a really good sort of starting place? As much as I've argued in the past that I get frustrated by a lot of courses that are trying to replicate what happens in the physical classroom online, but I recognize in this situation that we're in today, it's the perfect place to start. It's just
Yeah.
trying to replicate and just to get comfortable, because I don't feel like we're not going to, it is so much of a social issue, teaching and learning. It is so social that I worry sometimes when the technology gets in our way.
Yeah, I think one of the ways to mitigate against that, and this is something we use in software development all the time, so because it's easy to get fall in love with the solution, but know your why. Understand your why. Why are you trying to do the activity that you're trying to do or the engagement in the classroom? that why is the same why when you're applying it online. It's just done in a different way. And at that level, the technology is subservient to the why, right? It falls out of the why. It's something that you fill in understanding the why, but the why comes from you. Chris, I've been dying to ask you this because this is one that I've reflected on for myself. I've had this conversation with some parents, when we've talked about taxes and politics and budgets and departments of education. If you had $1 million to spend right now in a school district, in a college, where are you spending that? Great, we say this is a social problem. So does that mean you're going to spend it on pedagogy? Or are you putting that money behind tech that supports those kinds of things? How do you do that?
That's an amazing question. I've been asking that similar question to folks recently in hopes of getting some kind of stellar insight of something I hadn't thought about. I recognize the technology in many schools is lacking. I'm thinking specifically of our friends in the K-12 arena. I'm thinking of many community colleges where students might be underserved and not have the resources to afford the technology. Mm-hmm. And so I first go, we've got to get them some laptops. We got to get them some decent laptops that are going to work well in any room in their house. And then I realize, but at the same time, I need to make sure that I'm investing as much in my faculty and in my staff and making sure that they're comfortable in this new environment and using these tools. So part of me wants to make sure that they have the tech, but then I also I feel like I'm going to hedge my bets here. I want to put 50% in the tech and then 50% in the pedagogy to help people. But maybe I'm missing something. Maybe I should be putting more in the pedagogy. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
I like the way you put that. And as you were talking, Chris, like most other things, this comes back to the accessibility umbrella. And it makes sense to me why you put some in technology up front. I'm still surprised somewhat or just hyper aware that there is still a barrier to access for online learning. It's the devices itself, it's the bandwidth, and it's the support to know how to use those things. So that's important. And that baseline level of accessibility has to be there. But ultimately, when we're talking about enabling our educators and their support staff, I look at that as we're helping them utilize the technology and tools in front of them such that they can eliminate barriers systematically, that they can try to meet each and every student where they are. There are lots of ways that we can, and we've talked about on this show in the past, that we can utilize technology to personalize things for each individual, that we can help educators understand how to scale and automate things that they don't have to do themselves online, so they can spend more time one-on-one and collaborating with their students, more time looking for ways to create that social kind of connection within the fabric of the technology that they're forced to work in.
That's a really good point. And if you're just joining us, welcome to Between Two Moose. We are exploring trends and topics tied to teaching and learning with technology. Ken and I are talking today about online learning. Is it a social challenge or is it a technical challenge? Is it a little bit of both? We'd love your input if you've got any or any questions that you might like to ask. Ken, this is another thing that's got my attention, and I want to get your thoughts on this as well. What happens when the school year ends? And do we continue to plan for an online or a hybrid type of education scenario? Are we ever going to go back to feeling confident that we can just remain face-to-face? Or right. What are your thoughts there?
I got two thoughts on that. One's maybe a little more short-term, and then another one is the soapbox and pumping my fist as I speak. First is just the reality of the situation. I was doing a little bit of poking around on the interwebs. I don't know how much this is validated, but I haven't seen a case where we actually have a scalable vaccine for any type of coronavirus. I'm not talking about COVID-19 specifically, but we don't have a societal record of building effective vaccines against any types of coronavirus. We're going to have to live with the social distancing, masks, and things like that, I think for a lot longer than a lot of us were anticipating. I'm not looking at 2021 as being free and clear of this thing. And I don't think the schools and institutions that need to plan for continuity should be looking at things like that either. So, what that means is we're going to need to continue to have this idea of a digital door to the classroom. For anybody to have continuity, we not only want to have a way for them to access their learning, but we want to have a way for them to access their learning such that it feels continuous. It feels like I'm picking up where I've left off, or I've just changed lanes, rather than I'm doing something completely different, or I'm parachuting into a whole other environment. So I think that kind of goes to the pumping my fist in the air that, okay, now we've all got a taste of the fact that online learning can provide a great resiliency network. We should start to really understand, here are the benefits and the additional things that we can do with online learning in addition to what we're always doing. So if we're always working in the classroom and we continue to do that in 2021 and beyond, that's great. But there are things that we can do online in terms of setting expectations for assessment, posting resources so that they can be used, searched, and available for people as they see fit. Providing choice and voice in the way that they decide what they want to demonstrate as mastery. Doing prior learning assessments to know where we can meet individual where they're at and do that in a scalable way. Those are all things that online is going to do really well and could help improve the classroom environment, even if it's not a global emergency that's forcing us online. What do you think, Chris? Is that idealistic? Or
I don't think it's
realistic, I guess, too?
I think it's realistic. I think you're taking into consideration where we are today. As much as when I signed up to be a faculty member, I did not know online learning. It wasn't around. It wasn't a thing. And then it became part of a thing. And I watched my colleagues, some would say, looked at it as, what a great opportunity to offload maybe some tasks, or to like the flipped classroom mode. I'll record my lectures, that way we can spend more time lecturing. Very simple thing to do, but had a huge impact on their teaching and learning experience. And the students' learning experience as well has changed dramatically in light of this. I'm listening to my son right now, who's in college, who has moved online, and he says, I am in groups. In every one of my classes, I am spending time in groups with other students, using the video technology to support conversations, problem solving, and he said, I never did that in the previous 3 years of his college, in the same kind of classes, the same kind of curriculum. Never once was he required to do group work. And he says, now I'm constantly doing it. And at first he said I was resistant. And now he says it's an important part of it. He didn't think of it as a part of the learning process. He was one of those classic kind of students, like many of us, who said, what's in it for me? I'm just here to get my grade and move on. But now he's finding that he gets to socialize because he's not able to socialize on campus anymore. So the students are starting to become a little more acclimated. And so I'm really curious to see how this is going to play out in future terms. Mm-hmm. I'm anticipating students applying to schools to say, I did well online, and I'd like to continue online. Are you going to make me stop doing that and now make me go face to face, where I found my niche, I found my place? So I'm curious how that's going to roll out moving forward.
I am too. I think that you're going to see, and this is probably true of more, getting more towards adult learners, or at least at high school level, but you're starting to see a whole generation or cohort that's been exposed to a different format, a modality than they may have been used to. And like you say, some people are going to resonate really strongly with that. And, even just the way that working at your own pace and some of the really basic things you do online is going to be really productive and beneficial for some. It's going to turn off others. Therein lies kind of the art and science of doing things online, so that you can sort of support both. But I think you'll start to see a lot more savvy consumers from the student perspective. They're going to have more experience of, I had an online experience and it was really bad, but because it wasn't much put into it, versus I've had an online experience and it wasn't really for me, or I had an online experience and it was great. And it wasn't just academics. It was me being able to find my peers. It was me having access to student services and all of the support that I would get on campus or in my school that's now following me online and sort of presented for me. So where that sophistication in student needs and consumers will lie in the future, I'm really interested to see that. And 6 months from now, I'm sure we'll be talking about it.
Well, and I think that goes, if we can pull this into a nice little circle, this is why I want to argue that's the social challenge I think that schools are going to face now, is the technology can support all kinds of levels of engagement and search and connectivity, and ways to share information easily. And so now we have to figure out, how do we construct that in a way that's going to make sense for students? And to tie it back to your why question as well, I found myself regularly when I'm visiting with customers and prospects at D2L, I find myself asking, what are you trying to achieve? I mean, that sets the timbre for the entire conversation now.
Right.
It used to be, we were brought in to show you a specific, functionality of our tool. Now I find myself in situations with customers and users who are facing different questions now, and it's not about the technology, but it is, right? Mm-hmm. It's, how do I do the sociality things that we like to do that makes for good teaching and learning? How do we use the technology to do that? So yep. They're starting to ask, I think, more important questions around not technology, but around the social aspects of teaching and learning.
Yeah. Let me give you an example of where I've seen that, Chris, a little bit is, with something like a tool like Microsoft Teams. There's lots of other ones out there. Some people use Zoom, some people will use Google Meet or Hangouts, whatever it's called now. Doesn't really matter. But, at the beginning of the pandemic, you saw a lot of that being deployed as, hey, this is synchronous. We're all going to be in the room at the same time. And, this is our classroom. What I've started to see from the organizations that we've been working with is they're using the same technology, but now they're starting to look at, okay, let's record some material, or let's have something that students can review. When we bring people together, let's make it purposeful, where they're in smaller breakout groups, or students are able to self-assemble, and it's interactive. They're reacting to something that they saw ahead of coming together. They're presenting some information. And then, maybe there's another asynchronous activity where they follow on and, share an idea or create something new. So it's in the design and the orchestration of how to use the technology, not even in switching out the technology, that really had a big difference in that student experience and how much they're encouraged to bring themselves as humans and be social in their learning environment.
It's a great point, Ken. And so to wrap up, folks, I'm curious to know what you think. Is online learning a social challenge in your mind, or is it a technical challenge, or is it a little bit of both? We'd love your comments, feedback. Let us know what you think. We'd be delighted to pick this up again. As Ken mentioned, we're going to revisit a lot of these questions, I think, again in 6 months. And speaking of, we're going to be talking to, from Portland School District next week in Michigan. We're going to be speaking soon, I should say, with Justin Null, who is an ed tech. He is an education. I don't want to get his title wrong, but he supports the educational technology endeavors there at his school district. And it'll be fun to hear what's going on in his world and seeing the challenges and the successes and surprises that he's facing in light of this big transition. The big T.
Exactly. Yeah, let's pick his brain and see what he thinks on some of these topics too.
So I hope you can join us for that next time we meet on Between Two Moves. So thank you for joining us again. I'm Chris Sessums, and that's Kenneth Chapman. It was a delight speaking with you today, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Bye-bye. Know your why.